The B.S. Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the B.S. Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The B.S. Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The B.S. Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the B.S. Report, a hazy day here in Southern California. I got to do a plug. Check out Grantland.com if you haven't already. We've been up for a week and a half. A lot of good content up there, I think. Like to think, anyway. We have on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline right now from the New York Times, author of a book that came out a couple of weeks ago. It's called Bottom of the 33rd. It's about the longest AAA game ever, and it involved my beloved Red Sox. He's a sports bigamist. He's on the line right now. Dan Barry, what's happening?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the sports bigamy. So, you basically switched New York teams, which I'm fundamentally opposed to. I don't like it. Explain it. Tell me what happened.
What do you mean, switching teams from hopping around, you mean?
As a fan, yeah. You had one team, and then you switched to the other team, which I don't think should be legal.
I know. I was on a show a little while ago, and Frank DeFord was talking about the purity of being a one-team fan. He follows the Baltimore Orioles. But, I'm like a product of my age, so I'm 53. So when I was 7, which is the beginning of your sweet spot as a baseball fan, I was rooting for the Yankees. I inherited it from my father, and I loved them, and they sucked. I mean, they were just bad. In 1965, the Yankees were awful. Mickey Mantle was broken down. Elston Howard was broken down. Whitey Ford was not doing too hot. And so I loved rooting for the underdog. And I can rattle off names like, Dooley Womack and all these guys who are not remembered at all. And so it sounds counterintuitive to say, you're a Yankee fan and you were an underdog, you rooted for an underdog, but that just happened to be my case because, my father would tell me all about the great Yankees. But when I became of age, that wasn't the case. And in fact, in '67, your beloved Red Sox won the pennant, so I remember that team pretty well. I mean, Yastrzemski's from Long Island, which is where I'm from.
Right.
And '69, the rest of Long Island where I grew up was rooting for the Mets. And, I rooted for the Mets in the sense that, hey, this was Long Island, they represent New York. But I was still a devout Yankee fan. And so then when Chambliss hits the home run against Kansas City in 1976 and they go to the World Series only to lose to the Cincinnati Reds, I was there. I was rooting for them. But what happens is, an arrogance sets in with a winner. And it was like challenging my underdog thought. And I really struggled with it. It's just the way, from a working class background, my father was always raging against the system, raging against Nixon and all this kind of crap. And so, when they got good and they, 77, 78, I'm with you. I'm with Reggie Jackson. But by 81, the persona of Steinbrenner had so overtaken that team that I was beginning to feel out of place. And then he fires Dick Hauser. I don't know if anyone remembers this.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing here. I really felt that way. And so, I kind of was looking for the next underdog. And in '82, the Mets were really, really bad. No one remembered. I mean, Frank Howard was the manager for a little while, and George Bamberger and, Kingman was on that team. It was a bad team. And I have to say I kind of enjoyed the badness and rooting for the next level. And so then, they win the World Series against, the Red Sox. And then, then what comes out is they're all like, troubled guys, coke addicts, and they're arrogant too. And by now I'm working and living in New England. And, I'm going to New Britain Red Sox games, and I'm watching, Phil Plantier and Ellis Burks and all these other guys who would go up through the Red Sox system. And so I started following the Red Sox. I can't say that I totally dispensed with my feelings for the Yankees. It's like, it's like your first date. And I struggle with this. I'm not proud of it, but it's honest. I come by it honestly because I come by it through the underdog status. And so, you know, when I'll tell you the God's honest truth. When the Yankees were winning those World Series in the late 90s, I was covering City Hall, and Giuliani was the mayor. And I'll never forget this. You know, they had a parade, the ticker tape parade down the Canyon of Heroes, they called it, and all this kind of nonsense. And they put all these huge portraits on the front of City Hall. And so here's a big photograph of Jeter, and here's another one of Posada, and another one of Joe Torre. And then in the middle of it, and they're all in uniform, and in the middle of it is a big portrait of Rudy Giuliani in uniform. And I was going, I don't want to be a part of this. He looked like Yogi Berra on a bad day in that photograph. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I rooted for them. You know, I think the strongest I ever rooted for the Yankees was in 2001 after 9/11, and I really, really, really wanted them to win the World Series. It's so silly, you know. We all get emotional about the Piazza home run and all that stuff, but I really, you know, like it wouldn't have made anything better, really. Do you know what I mean? But you kind of wanted the Yankees to win, and they didn't.
That was the only time I've ever rooted for the Yankees. Those 3 home games in the 2001 World Series. I just felt like, you know, and obviously I hate the Yankees. Yeah. And I've always hated the Yankees, and I fundamentally hate them, and I don't even like to go to Yankee Stadium because I just don't like being there. But I just felt like those 3 games were important, and it was, you know, one of those things where you just put sports on this, you know, your sports and your biases on the side, and there was a greater good. I thought going. That was a polarizing thing for Red Sox fans because some people felt like you don't root for the Yankees under any circumstances, and my feeling was, well, I don't think we're going to have these specific circumstances ever again, and I'm okay with rooting for them now.
You know, I was talking about this to a class of students up in New Hampshire, and I was talking about, you know, my troubled baseball issues, and I talked about 2001, and a kid in the front screamed as I said, yeah, you know, I wish they had won that World Series. The kid in the first row screams, D-backs, like that. I said, what did you call me? He said, D-backs. He didn't care. He didn't care about my emotional trauma.
Right.
He was going like, Diamondbacks, let's go, baby. And, you know, I honor that.
Well, it's funny because when people switch sports teams, it's a really bad thing. Or if you give up give up on a sports team for whatever reason. Like, for instance, you know, the Bruins are a team that I loved until 1994 when I was 24. And I just cooled on them for a variety of reasons. But, you know, the owner, the product, a bunch of things. And now I've slowly come back. Yeah. The diehard Bruin fans who stuck with them through thick and thin, they kind of don't want anybody back in the bandwagon. And they're like, well, you left. You can't come back. And it's interesting because in real life, like, let's say you were divorced 3 times and you're on your 4th wife. Nobody would be like, God, I can't believe you're such a scumbag. You have 4 wives. But if you have 4 baseball teams, you're a scumbag, which is just a weird way to approach things.
But here's a question, though. After you gave up or you cooled on the Bruins, did you begin rooting for another hockey team? No,
I just became a hockey widow.
Well, you know, there's honor in that, isn't there? I mean, it wasn't like you went to Vancouver or to the Rangers.
No.
You just chilled.
I'm not okay. I think you can't switch teams unless there's a really good reason. I think, like, for instance, my buddy House was a big Orioles fan, and Angelos just killed the Orioles for him. And it got to the point where he just did not want to root for a team that had Angelos as the owner, and he became a baseball widow, and he lives in Washington, D.C., and then they got the Nationals, so he went to the Nationals. Now, I think that's acceptable. I'm okay with that.
I do too. Yeah.
But I think, like, if you know, I noticed this moving to L.A. I mean, I've been in L.A. for 8.5 years, and there's so many transplants here, and it's a real issue with the transplants. I wrote a column about this a few months ago about my daughter really liked the color purple, and I was worried she was going to become the Laker fan, because if you're raising kids in a city and they don't know anything other than that city, and they're gravitating towards the local teams, that becomes a judgment call with each thing. Do I stop this? How do I throw my body in front of this? Is it fair? And I don't know.
Do you introduce her to the Clippers, or what do you do?
Well, because I have Clipper season tickets, we've been going, and she likes Blake Griffin. But she knows, like, you know, it's a Boston house. Yeah. If the Celtics play the Clippers, we root for the Celtics, obviously. So she's a little bit of a sports bigamist, but you know, it's just that's what happens, I guess, if you move to another city.
But here's the moral question. All right, so if the Yankees are playing the Twins, okay? Yep. And the Yankees' salary is maybe double. Sometimes it was triple, almost 4 times the salary of the Twins. Where is the honor in that? I can't get my brain around that. And I know it doesn't make sense. And if you're with the Yankees, you bleed blue and all that stuff. I got it. I'm with you. I was bleeding blue before you were born. I got it. But I struggle with rooting against the Twins. I can't. There's something. I'm hearing my father, who was a diehard Yankee fan, yelling at me. No, it's not right to root for someone who's got one arm tied behind his back. These are the things I struggle with.
Well, and I think that's a huge reason why everybody was so mad at Miami during the NBA season, because they felt like they unfairly stacked the deck, and it came down to the fundamental decision that LeBron James made of, I don't want to beat Dwayne Wade, I want to play with him instead. That'll be easier for me. And people just rejected that, and they rejected the show, and they rejected the party afterwards, and you combine those 3 things, and people were out on him. And also, it was good that people, have villains. It's weird, though. We live in a world where I feel like the Miami Heat have replaced the Yankees as the #1 sports villain.
I think so, too. There's just this arrogance that came off them. And, I think they rue the day. I saw Wade talking about, maybe we went a little over the top when we did that, coming out party and all that kind of stuff. But, you're right. It's a tough call. Explain,
you're a New Yorker, explain to everybody what LeBron would have meant had he gone there. And I think that really, it was a double loss, because he goes to Miami and it just turned out to be bad for his career and the fact that he wasn't going head-to-head against Wade. But also, he would have owned New York. And that was the thing we lost, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, but then again, because I'm such a screwed-up guy, would I have felt bad for Cleveland? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though I'm a Knicks fan, and LeBron would have been great. I think Donnie Walsh would have figured that out pretty nicely. But in back of my mind, because I'm such a complicated and tortured guy, I'd be feeling bad about Cleveland, because Cleveland would have done the same damn thing, wouldn't they? I think the Knicks would not have done that coming out party. Do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of the country would have said, all right, you know what? They offered him a lot more money. It's okay. He's going to go. He's going to be cool. And who knows? Maybe they would have kept Gallinari, and it would have been a nice little mix there. But a part of me is still saying, what about that Rust Belt city? LeBron's from there. I don't know.
Well, all LeBron would have had to do is this. He could have just looked at it and said, you know what? This is the biggest city in the world, or one of the biggest cities in the world, biggest city in America. They haven't won a title in 40 years. Yeah. They have the best fans. Every time I go here, I'm fired up. And I just felt like at this point in my career, winning a title in New York could be the most important thing I can do as an athlete. And this is why I want to come here. And I think Cleveland, they would have been bitter. But ultimately, I think they would have accepted that for the same reason that anybody who lives in a small city kind of understands when you go to a bigger one.
Yeah. Well, how do you think Cleveland would have responded? Do you think Cleveland would still be bitter, yet more okay with it, if LeBron had gone to Miami and they didn't have that in-your-face celebration, like, I just dumped my date because she's ugly and now I'm with the cool kids? Do you think Cleveland would have taken it a little easier?
Well, think about what our friend Dan Flores would have advised LeBron. He would have told him not to do the show. Yep. He would have told him not to do the party, and he would have told him to tell the Cleveland owner and their fans first that he wasn't coming back and that he was going to sign with another team, and then announce the team like a day later, and do it in the most contrite way possible, and not like this was like a cause for celebration. Like, everything about how he handled that was a disaster. You could write a whole book about how he handled it.
I agree. And you know what? Everything that you just laid out that Flores would have said is easy. It's just easy. It's common sense. It's courtesy. You're thinking ahead. And what they did in Miami was exactly the opposite.
A lot of the stuff, the people that you cover and the stories you cover, a lot of it does come down to just things being handled badly by the people around the person who's involved, right?
Yeah, except let's take, just a step aside from sports for a moment. Anthony Weiner. Here's what you do. If you're sending, first of all, don't send the tweets. You're a congressman. Now, let's just stipulate, okay, don't send the tweets.
Right.
Once you send the tweets, okay, and you're caught, say you did it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So who advised him to lie to Wolf Blitzer and to the national media? Do you think the national media will give you a pass when you come back and say, hey, you know what, actually, it is my package?
Right.
You know what I mean? Now, that's an easy, and you know what, if he had done that, he might still be in Congress, honest to God, because he would have said, you know what, I screwed up. There are worse things, you know. Barney Frank did some things back in the day. You know, other guys have survived it. But Weiner, by lying, by getting bad advice or not taking advice, blew his career.
It always seems like the cover-up is worse than whatever initially happened.
Oh, it's awful. And
it's the lesson of history.
Yeah, and I'm a reporter, and Flores is a guy who's been dealing with this for forever. You know, you're exactly right, because that's the worst thing. It's a betrayal on top of the original betrayal, and you don't want to be doing that.
I've asked a lot of people this on the BS Report. I'm always interested in different people's takes. Sports and politics, it seems like the one big difference is that I can have one of my best friends is a Yankee fan, Jacko. He's coming on the podcast after you. We can have Yankee Red Sox arguments all the time, good-natured, and it will never get personal. But if we argued about politics, that switch goes off, and there's just something that becomes personal about it. Why can't we argue about politics the way that fans argue about sports?
You know, I'm not the biggest brain, but probably because with politics, it affects your life. You know, if one side is going to change the tax structure, if one side's going to say let's go to war, it affects you in a much more profound way than in sports. And so people get their tribal juices flowing in a much higher level than saying, hey, you know, the Red Sox suck. Oh no, the Yankees suck.
Right.
You know?
But you don't think that, because it seems to me that people, at least some people, feel just as passionately about sports. Like, it's hard to differentiate that passion.
How many guys do you know can name the starting lineup of the Red Sox, but aren't really clear on who their congressperson is?
Right.
You know?
That's a part. Like, I feel like in a lot of cases the passion is equal, but there's an edge to the political passion, and probably mainly for the reasons you just laid out. But it is interesting to me that people just can't seem to have a level-headed debate. It's got to be, you have to be either firing bullets from one side or firing bullets from the other, and you can't accept any compromise from the other side at all.
Here's another reason, perhaps, okay? When you're arguing baseball, let's say you're arguing Red Sox, Yankees, what you can point to most of the time are quantitative measures. Do you know what I mean? And then you can play back and forth whether Jeter's losing range or whatever, however you want to go there. With politics, the truth of the matter is we get so heated because we're aware of our own ignorance, because we don't really know what the hell's going on at any moment. We can't tell whether the congressman or the president or the senator is telling us the truth, and so there's this big gray area where we're uncomfortable, and so we get more and more worked up about it.
So you think we need advanced metrics for politics, and maybe that would help. Maybe sabermetric stats.
There have been attempts, but every time we try it, something slips by.
Explain to me what the whole baseball situation in New York has been like since they built these new stadiums.
Well, you know, I went to Yankee Stadium for the first time just the other day, and I was at Citi Field last year. And, you know, I mean, you probably know that Citi Field is not a hitter's ballpark. And so you wonder, like, why the Wilpons built this ballpark so that, you know, everything that David Wright hits dies around the 350 mark. You know what I mean? Right. It could have been a very nice, cozy, interesting ballpark that allowed for good pitching and hitting. So when you go to Citi Field, you know, you can. There's oftentimes, even though they're doing better than they had been. Whoa, no one's shooting at me. That's lightning. You know.
That would have been a first for the BS Report. Gunshots fired at a guest.
Right. If you want, say it was gunshots.
Okay. Thank you.
I shouldn't have said what I said about politics. But you know, there's plenty of room to spread out, even though the Mets are doing better. So I think people are like, you know. It's more expensive, you know. And when you walk in, Wilpon did make a mistake by making it one big, you know, reliquary for the Brooklyn Dodgers. You know what I mean? That was a mistake. I mean,
Right.
we all love the Dodgers, but hey, the Mets have a pretty rich history by now. It's been 50 years. Throw out a Mr. Met, throw out a Seaver. So okay, we get Jackie Robinson. So that's going on there. At Yankee Stadium, they did approximate what it was like, but when you're there, it's not the real place. You know what I mean? So I was at Fenway last month, and Fenway is Fenway. They've done some things. They've done some renovations, and you got to be richer to be at certain parts of the ballpark. But still, at the end of the day, it's one of the originals. You know what I mean? And and that's a special place.
I think I've done a 180 on this because in the end of last decade, the late 90s, when they were really talking about the Red Sox selling the team and a new stadium, we need a new Fenway. And I wholeheartedly, I was all for dump this one, build one that looks exactly like it right next to it. I actually like the idea of, at the time, I liked the idea of Bizarro Fenway, where you'd have the monster in right field because we had such bad luck. Like, why not put it the other way? But I'm so glad they kept Fenway the way it was, and I think the ads they made were really smart. The one thing they need to do is change the seats, half of which still point out toward center field or second base, which is just stupid. But I think the Yanks made a real mistake. I think they pretty easily could have stayed in that ballpark and renovated it in a way that they could have kept it where it was. It's not the same. It's not the same field that Mantle was on and Babe was on and Garrett was on.
No,
or is it? It's
not. And it. They have the same structure, along its lip and everything. But it's not the same structure at all.
I wonder if they would change if they had to do it over again. I wonder if they would have done it this way.
Well, here's the thing. You remember, though, that in the 70s, the Yankees played at Shea Stadium for a few years while they renovated Yankee Stadium. So it had only gone through a renovation, 30 years ago. So I can't speak to whether the whole thing was decrepit, like McCoy Stadium was at one time. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's too bad because.
Oh yeah.
Although personally, I don't care because I'm glad the old one's gone. I had so many bad memories there, but doesn't on TV. It's just weird to see the empty seats. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Seeing a guy at the plate and just seat covers behind him.
Yeah. And whoever's sitting there, if you do see someone sitting there, they're dropping a cool $1,000 just to have to see the game and have a beer.
Does Wilpon need to go? Can he salvage this?
I haven't figured that out. I can't tell. That's one of those gray areas where, did he know about Madoff, because he did set up that separate fund with the other guy, which seems like, it was like his default fund, which would suggest that he might have known something. But, I don't know. I think here's the truth. If the Mets begin winning, let's just say the Mets become even more competitive, no one will care. You know what I mean? I mean, think of what the Yankees endured with Steinbrenner. I mean, he's paying a bookie to try and find stuff out on Winfield.
Yeah, it's a good point.
He's there's another gunshot.
Jeez.
We're very forgiving if we win.
Yeah, I think the Dodgers are in a different situation. That guy needs to go.
I agree with that.
People are done with Frank McCourt, and the Giants guy getting beat in a coma with no security around was the last straw. I just don't think it's such a different level than Howie Spira getting trying to get dirt on Winfield and beyond, and the fact that they barely have enough money to make payroll every month, and that's a different situation. I do agree with you that I think Wilpon could potentially recover from this, but the Met, when you get to spend. They got to be in the top 5 or the top 6 with payroll every year. It's really hard to not make the playoffs of baseball when you have that much money to spend and you're just spending it wrong.
I agree. And I think people are just tired of the marriage of the McCourts. Okay, enough of this,
Yeah. Quickly, you wrote a piece about Rick Welts, who came out, NBA executive. I had him on the podcast a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, it was great.
Phoenix Suns president, and the reaction that piece got, I thought was really good because nobody ultimately really cared. They're like, oh, cool. There was no fallout. There's no backlash. What were you expecting in the days leading up to that piece?
There was a lot of anxiety, much more so for Rick than for me. We knew that it was a moment, if you know what I mean. Except David Stern said, you know what? I wonder if anyone's even going to care. He said, I hope I'm wrong. And Stern's approach was, this is old news. It's, you know what I mean? He was hoping it would just come and go, and maybe Rick was making more of it than was necessary. But the truth of the matter is that it had a large effect, and I don't think it was only because it came on the heels of Kobe's comments. I think it stopped a lot of people in America and said, you know what, hey, look at our watches. It's 2011, and some guy feels as though he cannot be open about his sexuality in the workplace, in the sports world. That's screwed up. And I think there was this clarifying moment, and that's what Steve Nash said to me. This is crazy. Nash was, when I spoke to him, he was actually angry about the subject. I'd never met him before, but he was angry that we were even talking about it. And I think that the story brought a moment of clarity and may have cleared up some things. And I do think it nudged the issue in the right way. And I think it was brave of Rick to come out the way he did. He was very honest about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I didn't get one. Maybe I shouldn't say that. There were hundreds and hundreds of comments sent to the New York Times. And Rick got hundreds and hundreds of not only emails, but hundreds and hundreds of handwritten letters. So people taking the time to pick up a pen and say something thoughtful, encouraging, heartfelt, and then mailing it to Phoenix. I mean, we don't do that anymore. And he got hundreds of letters, all of them supportive.
Do you feel like we're getting closer and closer to a high-profile athlete coming out?
I was talking to Nash about that, and I said, well, why doesn't somebody do it? And he said, hey, you know what? Money, endorsements, So you have to, before you do it, you have to have some kind of comfort level that Nike and Adidas would be, on board. And if you ask me, I think, wow, wouldn't that be a cool advertising campaign? Do you know what I mean? You could capitalize on it in a respectful way and celebrate the moment. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I don't mean exploit it. I don't mean that at all. I mean come out, be honest about it, and through advertising, even make it less and less and less of an issue. Do you know what I mean? But do I think that's going to happen? I'd say in the next decade, but I don't think in the next 5 years. But that's me.
I think it's going to be in the next 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, and
you're going to name names, right? No, I'm kidding.
Well, I do think I think somebody might have their hand forced. Is how it plays out. You look at how some of this stuff's happened. Yeah, it's just even look at what happened to Arthur Ashe, in the mid '90s when they published that he had AIDS and and he didn't want that information out. And then just the way the internet works, I don't think we're headed toward a good place with that. But we might have somebody, like somebody like Neil Patrick Harris came out. Yeah. And he was playing this playboy on the sitcom who was getting women all the time. And, you could have made a case. I don't agree with this case, but you could have made a case that it could have hurt the show or hurt his character that he was playing, that he was coming out, and it didn't. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the best parallel to an athlete coming out. I just don't think it's going to be a big deal. And if anything, I really do think that as weird as it sounds, I don't think it's a bad career move. Yeah. I think the guy becomes a hero to that community, and I think he'd get more attention than less, and I think it would be the right kind of attention. And he'd have to deal with some heckles at some games, I'm sure, and some bad emails and things like that, but I think the greater good would kind of supersede the bad stuff.
Well, I would hope that it's within 2 years, and I would hope it would be that person's choice rather than having it, forced. Do you know what I mean?
Me too.
That he would have control, and if it is forced, then he would seize control of it and make it his own and move on from there. Do you know?
Yeah, Tell me about your book, which I have not read yet, because the only book I have read in the last 4 months was because I've been launching this website, and I just do not have time to read books. The only one I've read is the ESPN book, which I felt like I had to read because I didn't know if I was going to get fired. So this book is on my summer bookshelf, but I have a few friends that have loved it. So give it a quick rundown.
Yeah, sure. So 30 years ago, as long as you promise to read it. But
I promise to read it. I'm going to read it this summer. I look forward to reading it.
There'll be a quiz in September.
Okay.
No, in 1981 in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, if you're from New England, you know Pawtucket, Rhode Island, it's a struggling mill city. You know, it's one of these places as you drive on 95, you'll see all these old textile mills, ghostly buildings that spoke of, when it was really a capital of industry, but that had long gone by 1981, and Pawtucket was still trying to find its place. In Pawtucket, there's McCoy Stadium, which was a stadium built during the Depression. It was basically a job creator by this colorful mayor, and they built it on a swamp, and so that meant even to this day, McCoy Stadium is said to be still settling. Okay, because they sunk tons and tons of concrete, which also meant tons and tons of money and tons of jobs. And so they built this stadium that kind of is still floating in the swamp. And so in 1981, it's April, it's freezing out, and the Rochester Red Wings come to town to play the Pawtucket Red Sox. It's AAA level baseball. Right. So the game follows its normal course, and in the bottom of the ninth inning, Pawtucket ties it up 1-1, so they go into extra innings. There's only about 1,700 people in the stands at the beginning of the game, which is about less than a third of its capacity. And some of these guys on the field, that's what I love about minor league baseball, by the way. If you watch a Major League Baseball game, everyone has made it to the major leagues, right? At least they've had that career goal. On the minor leagues, when you're watching a minor league game, to me, there's this Shakespearean element. There's this awaiting tragedy that's unfolding on the field, because some of these guys, most of these guys arguably are not going to make it to the major leagues, even as a backup catcher or as a utility guy. They're not going to make it. So there's this air of desperation. Do you know what I mean? So when I watch a minor league game, to me it's much more emotional and theatrical in a way. So anyway, this is what's going on. It's the bottom of the ninth. Pawtucket ties it up. They go into extra innings. It's freezing out. It's so cold that both teams are burning broken bats and barrels on the first and third base side to keep warm. It's brutal. The wind is blowing in. It's also Holy Saturday night. It's also Passover night. So the game keeps going, and then around the 15th inning, they're saying, well, at least there's a curfew, and Rochester could go back to the Howard Johnson motel and have a few beers before the night ends, and toast the risen Lord, because it would be Easter by then. Right. Except that back then, this is all the era of mimeographs and all that kind of stuff. The paragraph that allowed for curfews was not in the regulations for the International League that year. No one knows why. To this day, no one can figure it out. It was there in 1980. It's there today, but in 1981, that one paragraph, in that usual language, a curfew shall be called at 12:50 a.m. in the municipality, it wasn't there. No one knew this except the three umpires, because the umpires, before every season, read the regulations like Talmudic scholars, looking and understanding what's been changed over the off season. You know what I mean? Right. Little things. And so in the 15th inning, everyone's saying, they're beginning to yawn and thinking they're going to go home, and the umpire said, you keep playing. It's not in our books. No curfew. You keep playing. And if you think about it, that's where it gets absurd. You know what I mean? Because a baseball game doesn't have a time clock and all that stuff that writers always love to wax eloquent about. And so that means this could spin towards eternity. They don't know what's going on. The wind's blowing in. No one's scoring. It's freezing out. It's Easter Sunday, and these guys are telling us to keep playing. And you and I might think, oh, how romantic. How about being the player? I know that the center fielder was freezing his butt off, and the only way he was staying warm was to say one curse word over and over and over again, screaming it into the night. Wow. So they keep playing. The top of the 21st inning, Rochester scores because of a wind-blown double. In the bottom of the 21st, Pawtucket gets a man on second from another wind-blown double, and then a guy named Wade Boggs gets up. And Wade Boggs, in 1981, was not really a prospect. You know his history. You know that Boston had not protected him. Anybody could have bought him for $25,000 in 1980,
right.
And in 81 he was not protected because back then it was third baseman was Mike Schmidt. You know, third base was getting a lot of home runs out of that position, and Boggs was not that guy. Though people would tell you if Boggs wanted to hit home runs, he could. You know, he's a complicated guy, as we all know.
Right.
He gets up and he hits an opposite field double, which became his trademark pretty much, and he winds up in second, and his teammates, you know, he couldn't tell whether his teammates wanted to hug him or kill him. And he always says that. Now, it could be because he's now extended this game even longer into the night. It also could be because they just didn't like him anyway.
Yeah.
He wouldn't let his teammates use his bats, and he wouldn't let his bats touch their bats because he didn't want his bats to become infected with their bad hitting habits. You know how you do that, right?
What a wacko he was.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But on the other side of the Wade Boggs equation is, and you hear this when you go to McCoy and Pawtucket, how hard he worked. I mean, the guy was a maniac. I mean,
yeah.
We all know about he had all these little superstitions and rituals and all that kind of nonsense. But he worked his butt off. He really, really did. Every day, hundreds of grounders and hundreds of takes in the batting cage and trying to get better. He knew his weakness was his fielding, and he worked on it.
Well, he's also a guy that he came along about 20 years too early.
Yeah.
Now that we have all these Sabre stats, there are certain guys like him and Tim Raines and a couple others that, you know, I'm a huge Red Sox fan. We used to get mad at Wade Boggs when it was second and first with one out and he walked. Because it was like, you're our best hitter. You got to get a hit there. But now, you know, the more we learn, the more data we have, you just want to get guys on base any way you can, and the more guys you get on base, the more good things happen. And nobody appreciated that when he played.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because it's his selfishness, in retrospect, was helpful to the team. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And it's weird to think about it that way, but I remember vividly when I was in New England, I mean, everyone was kind of down on Boggs because it always looked like, you know, he was already calculating his average as he was trotting down first base.
Yeah.
So he ties it up, and they keep going. Fewer and fewer people in the stands.
Wait, don't ruin the ending.
Oh, okay. All right.
Take us to like the 30th inning, and then don't tell us what happens.
All right. I'll tell you. Let's see, the 30th inning. Okay, there are 19 people in the stands. Okay, so there are 19 people in the stands, and we know their names.
Yeah.
Okay, because the owners of the Pawtucket Red Sox, and by the way, the team at this stage had just come out of a kind of a bankruptcy, and this owner from Woonsocket had taken it over. You know, imagine 1977, the Boston Red Sox had no one who wanted its AAA team. No one wanted it, and they finally bent the arm of this guy, and he takes it over, and the ballpark's a dump. It's a cold. It's a lousy place. And so he knows that this is his moment. You know, it's already the longest game in baseball history. And so they took all the names of the people in the stands and they said, okay, you got a season's pass from now on for showing either your lunacy or your faithfulness. And so there are 19 people in the stands. And, you know, it's usually the guys that I tracked them down. The reason they stayed, it's weird. It begins to get, like, kind of spiritual. You know, it's like, I can't tell you how many of them told me, look, when I went a couple of years earlier, my father and I went to the Red Sox game in Fenway, and we left early to beat the traffic with the Red Sox up. And then while we're stuck on 93 in traffic, we hear that the Red Sox lost. And there's this air of superstition. There's this air of, you know, you betrayed your loyalty to your team by leaving. You know what I mean? And yet it's a familiar thing, but it's kind of sweet or crazy when you apply that sensibility to a game that's now in the 30th inning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The only way they're staying warm is the owner has broken out a bottle of Chivas Regal that he has in his office, and they're passing it around like you and I would, like with a bottle of Mad Dog or something. You know, just trying to keep warm. And Joe Morgan, the manager of the Pawtucket Red Sox, who goes on to some great acclaim in the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a big Morgan guy. He's a wonderful guy.
Morgan Magic.
Absolutely. And he's smarter than they gave him credit for, and they dumped him unceremoniously, if you ask me. But anyway, he's already been kicked out. He got kicked out on the 22nd inning for arguing a call, and when he was kicked out, he's screaming so loudly and so colorfully, using so many expletives, that it's echoing through the empty stadium. And there's a radio station there from Rochester, and so his words are being carried, they're rising like heat up to the microphone, and then they're being carried several hundred miles to Rochester. And there are many people in Rochester who are listening. We know this too. And what do they hear? They hear Joe Morgan wishing them a happy Easter in very colorful terms. It's kind of cool. The broadcaster for the Rochester team had said, "Hey, is anybody out there? Is anybody listening?" It's like 3:30 in the morning on Easter Sunday. If you're listening, call us or drop us a note. They got several hundred letters. People were listening to the game, right. Because they felt the same way. If they turned the radio off, it would be bad for their team. And so we leave it there. Let's say Bruce Hurst is on the mound. He's pitching extremely well. He's unhittable. And pitching for Rochester is a guy named Jim Umbarger, who had already been in the major leagues, thinks that he's going to get back up. He hopes he's going to get back up. He hopes that there's a scout in the stands watching how wonderfully he's pitching. Of course, there's no scout there. And, of course, the Baltimore Orioles pitching staff in 1981 was like, it was unbelievable. Beginning with Jim Palmer, it was unbelievable. He didn't have a prayer of getting onto that squad. And so you have in this night, no one's really watching. It's freezing cold out. It's Easter Sunday. Two teams are going to play on and on and on into eternity, and they all have these hopes of getting to someplace else. And so, and as you know, if you're playing for Pawtucket, you're only 45 minutes from Fenway, and a lot of these guys never got that 45-minute ride to Fenway.
Well, I can't wait to read it. It includes two of my favorite Red Sox ever, Oilcan Boyd and Wade Boggs. And even though I turned on Boggs a little bit after the Margot Adams thing, it was such a bummer.
Yeah.
It was like, come on, Wade, you're hitting 370 every year. You got to do better than this Margot Adams.
But then he goes on to, I think he went on to Geraldo, didn't he? And diagnosed himself as a sex addict. Oh, no, he had seen an episode on Geraldo about sex addiction, diagnosed himself, and then, began the healing. So
look, that's another reason why he came along 20 years too early, because he would have been awesome in the Internet era. He really would have.
He would have.
All right, Dan Barry, your book, Bottom of the 33rd, available now as a late Father's Day gift for any dad who likes baseball. Good luck with that. Good luck with the summer. Good luck with the sports bigamy. Talk to you soon.
Hey, hang in there. Thanks a lot.
All right, you know what? Let's throw this to a part two. We're going to call my buddy Jacko at work, diehard Yankee fan. Haven't talked to him in about 6 weeks. We got a lot to talk about. So check out part two of the B.S. Report on iTunes or ESPN.com's Pod Center with Jack O.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the B.S. Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.